Hello, thank you for tuning in. My name is Paula Nassif, and I currently serve on the board of directors for Mass Insight as the board clerk. Thanks to my board fellowship with Latinos for Education, I officially joined the board of Mass Insight in January of 2020. I instantly fell in love with the organization. And besides my work at Mass Insight, I currently manage the Wolters Kluwer Global Partner Program for individual subscribers. Today, I'm honored to speak with Lorena Lopera, who is the Executive Director at Latinos for Education and a Boston School Committee member. Thank you for taking the time to speak with me. Lorena, how are you?
Hola, Paula. It is great to be here. It's exciting to be here with an incredible community partner, Mass Insight. It's also just always a treat to be able to connect with alumni from our programs who continue to do amazing things in the community. So thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us. So I wanted to give a little introduction about Latinos for Education. And so just to give everyone some background, Latinos for Education, L4E, is the first Latino-funded and led national organization solely dedicated to creating leadership pathways for Latinos in education. L4E supports an ecosystem of Latino education leaders to access highly influential roles and opportunities. Currently, Latinos make up 25% of school children and will become a third of the US population by 2050. Fortunately, educational equity is still out of reach for 5.4 million Latino students. So I'd like to ask you, Lorena, if you could tell us a little bit more about L4E and like the work you're doing in the community.
Yes. Well, thank you for that introduction. As was mentioned, Latinos for Education, we really strive to develop, place, and connect essential Latino leadership in the education sector, while mobilizing Latino voices to promote practices and policies that remove barriers to equitable educational opportunity. Now, what does that mean? We really think, we believe, we know in our guts and also in the data that representation matters, and that incorporating the Latinx community's voice into solutions will yield more effective practices for Latino students and families. And you just gave off a statistic around 25% of the student body across the nation that is Latinx, that identifies as Latinx, and that number will only continue to climb. And so with such a large percentage of students that have this identity, we know that that means that we need teachers that share the same background, that we need leaders who understand the challenges and also understand the assets and the beauty that exists within our communities. And so we exist because we know that there is so much talent in our community, and we know that there are barriers that need to be eliminated, and we want to work together to get to a more equitable educational system for all students and families.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Lorena. And you just brought me back to my experience with Latinos for Education. And the reason why I joined, really, I was volunteering at a school in Brighton, and I was just seeing how difficult it must be for teachers. And with all of the situations going on now, before it wasn't COVID, but now with COVID and Delta, how hard it is really to find teachers of color, or to find a way of speaking to students. So I was doing this volunteer work, and I decided, how could I get more involved in the education world? I had no background. I came from finance, marketing, and no knowledge. So Latinos for Education gave me like that, sort of the backbone of what was going on and how can I position myself to be a voice for students like myself, students who may not feel like they have a voice. And being that, I took it very seriously, and so it was a great program for me because I feel like I'm a voice at the table, and these students may see me as some sort of role model for them, so that they don't feel like they are left behind or that there's no one at the table for them. So that's how sort of what motivated me to get involved. And then another colleague from Mass Insight also joined, Ernesto, who also joined through his fellowship with Latinos for Education. So we're all like excited to have had the connection with Mass Insight because it's such an important organization and it's doing so many things to change lives and change schools in Massachusetts, but also across the country.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing your experience, Paula. I think it's really, that's a through line for all of our programs. I think that it really is about ensuring that folks have a, a basis of understanding on what the educational system looks like, and particularly the impacts and the challenges that exist for Latino students and families, because there are a lot of different narratives. And even in a place like Massachusetts that has a top quality educational system, that doesn't necessarily translate to every student demographic group, right? Not every student demographic group is being served at the same quality. And that's not information that everybody readily has, because it goes against the narrative that often makes it into media and into just the general rhetoric that we hear. And so I'm glad that the Latino Board Fellowship was productive and just a good experience for you in learning, and then also just in connecting to organizations such as Mass Insight that is doing incredible work in terms of educational equity. I'd love to share a little bit more about our other programs, because we do have a variety. We want to support Latinx folks, Latinx leaders in different spaces in their careers and in different engagement in the education sector. So we have three major programs. We have our Latinx Teacher Fellowship, and that really works with more earlier career teachers. And we bring together a national cohort with different regional representation. And we build a network of peers and provide tools so that folks collaboratively prepare and improve the skills needed to serve large Latinx populations, large English or multilingual or emerging bilingual populations. And the reason that that program came to be is because we know that 43% of our Latinx teachers will leave the classroom by year 4. And so there's oftentimes a really big focus on recruiting educators of color or recruiting Latinx teachers, but we also have to support and retain our teachers. And we think that this is one of the programs that begins to address that challenge, so we can actually make some headway in those representation numbers, right? We also have our Aspiring Latino Leaders Fellowship. And so this program focuses on supporting future or emerging Latinx leaders to advance in their leadership journey. Now that's a 9-month fellowship. We gather monthly, and our fellows go through various leadership sessions such as identity development, understanding the state of Latino education, executive presence, community and family engagement. And again, this program is a program that develops and supports educators who perhaps are past the 4-year mark, more in the 8 to 13-year mark, and helps them continue to think about their leadership journey. Because we also know that this is, in order for us to, again, to continue to diversify the educator pipeline, we need leadership. We need leadership of color that's going to help to cultivate and going to help retain. And the data tells us that leadership in a schoolhouse and in a district, leaders of color really make a difference in this. And then there's a program that you were part of, right? The Latino Board Fellowship, which is a little bit different because not everyone in this program is in education. So the Latino Board Fellowship really identifies Latinx multi-sector leaders, so folks from inside and outside of the education sector, so that everybody does have that baseline that we talked about on what is the state of Latino education, and then also being immersed in best practices around board governance. And then the other piece that's really critical here is then the connection to a nonprofit board that does have a stated goal around board diversity, right? And the whole premise is to be able to get folks who are Latino, who have assets, who have a perspective, and connecting them with an organization that is perhaps likely serving a significant portion of Latino students and families, and to have that representation at those decision-making tables. Because as you said, not only is it important for the students and the families to see that representation at those decision-making tables, but it's also important for our educators to see that leadership represented at decision-making tables, and also just a perspective that is brought to those decision-making tables, right? The questions that are asked, the pieces that perhaps would be missed or forgotten if we're just thinking through a really general normative perspective. So those are some of the programs that we offer, and we get the privilege of working with amazing fellows / alumni such as yourself.
Thank you, Lorena. I've had the opportunity to attend some of the sessions and provide some support with the fellows. So it's always a rewarding experience for me to be able to give back and be able to teach, the upcoming fellows something that they could take, with them, because it's not easy, especially if you come outside of the education sector. But it's so rewarding. It's so empowering to have access to a program like Latinos for Education and to be able to learn from it, and also how it can support you in your career and your aspirations. And it definitely has given me, has provided me with a lot of knowledge to bring to the table at Mass Insight, and new ideas and ways that we could do things better, and especially around equity in education. I think that's an area that I'm super, passionate about, and would like to see, more done across the state to ensure that we're teaching all students, that we're taking into consideration their needs, their goals, their aspirations, and that we're not just continuing to do like a one size fits all with everyone. Because coming from public school systems and, being stuck behind in ESL classes, and just like my own struggles in education, like I don't want to see it happen again, with more and more students now who, that are coming out of college. I think more Latinos are graduating college now. Many more are even pursuing the idea of college, which was like a taboo back in the day, like, you can't afford college. But yes, you can, and yes, you can do all the things you dreamed of. So it's great. It's great to chat with you. I also want to just say congratulations on, joining the Boston School Committee. That must be an exciting time for you.
So yes, thank you for that. It is an exciting time. My son attends one of the Boston Public Schools, and my little one, who's 3, she will be joining Boston Public Schools in the next year or so. And so I think it's really important for all of us to be engaged in our communities. And I'm just humbled by the opportunity to be able to do that very thing in my own backyard. So it's a new, exciting, and also daunting task to take on.
Well, I'm just excited to see women sort of leading the committee, and to see Latinas.
Mothers leading.
That's awesome, because I think that I mean, even in general business, women who lead organizations, are proven to make changes, and to have success, and to bring across more success, I think, for the goals that we're trying to accomplish in this state. So I'm excited for that. And I also want to, if you could tell me more about your work with the bill that you're working to pass with the Diversity Act.
Yes. So as I'm sure you've gathered, and as I'm sure you know, but as I'm sure folks who are listening have gathered, educator diversity is a key component of our work. And so we have had the privilege of being able to work with a variety of different organizations as part of or leading the work on the Educator Diversity Coalition here in Massachusetts, who is really in support of the Educator Diversity Act. And that is a bill that is currently, the primary sponsors are Chairwoman Peisch, speaking of women in leadership roles, and then also Chair Jason Lewis. And so this piece of legislation is really looking to serve as a national model for diversifying the teacher pipeline through state level policy, right? And so there are four major components of this particular bill. One is to establish a pathway for alternative certification. The other is to establish an educator diversity dashboard. So one of the things that we hear is, and that we know to be true, is that when we go to the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education website to try to gather information around retention, or hiring data broken down by demographic information, it's not readily available and it looks different from one place to another. And so we want to be able to point to what are the bright spots in our states, who are the districts that are doing this well, and then where are the challenges, right? Where are the districts where this really needs to become a priority if it isn't already one? And we believe that beginning through transparency and establishing an educator diversity data dashboard that can get us closer to that. We also really want to, so the third provision of this is to require uniformity across school districts in hiring and promotional practices, because we know that there's work that needs to be done. Each and every one of us has biases. And so we know that gets infiltrated into decisions that we make, how decisions are made. And so that there's some training that all of us need to be a part of, that districts need to have as part of their hiring and promotional practices. And that it's not a one-off, one-shot thing, right? Like that this is an ongoing piece of work that needs to be looked at and interrogated. And then I think the other piece is the elevating the voices of diverse educators via educator diversity councils. So we think that it is incredibly important that particularly in areas where perhaps the numbers are even smaller, that folks have an opportunity to engage with decision makers on what they're seeing on the ground, and what are some of the challenges that are coming up for their students, the families that they serve, and themselves as educators. And we want to make sure that there is really a direct line of communication between educators of color and folks such as superintendents or school committees. And so leadership, we want to ensure that through educator diversity councils. I'm just going to go back to the point number one around the establishing pathway for alternative certification. That is a big one, because we recognize that the MTELS, the exam that leads to licensure, is, statistically speaking, it is a barrier for many of our educators of color to engage in this profession. And so we want to make sure that we're looking at that, and that we are keeping talent in our classrooms. We hear a lot from superintendents that oftentimes there's a lot that has to happen in terms of bending over backwards and coming up with all sorts of different work in order to be able to get a waiver for educators who have proven their worth, for educators of color who have proven their worth, who have amazing relationships with students and families, who are doing incredible work in the classroom in terms of teaching and academics. But there's a barrier in being able to maintain that educator in the classroom because of MTELs. And so we want to really examine this and ensure that we're clear on a pathway for alternative certification.
Yeah, that was an interesting point. I'm sure there are so many barriers, not just the test, that will keep, teachers of color from pursuing those career opportunities or staying within education. I think as a Commonwealth, we have, the opportunity, the responsibility to ensure that we're building the next generation of diverse educators who are going to, change things for students of color. And I think this act will help because students of color, minorities, Latinos, Latinas, they are the future of the Commonwealth, being that now minorities are the majority, at least in Boston. So I think that we need to ensure that their success. I know Mass Insight this is a big pressing issue for us to ensure that their success in the classroom requires systemic changes to the educator pipeline. And so I urge folks that are listening to get more information, which we'll share, about the Educator Diversity Act, and also help pass it in the legislature, because it not only is it important, but it could be a role, like a sort of like as a model for other states, and hopefully achieve that educational equity that we're looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the pieces that I get most excited about when we do think about the diversity that exists in our classrooms with our students is the talent is there, right? Like the diverse workforce, our future is there. And so if we are intentional and if we are investing truly in a comprehensive way in those students and our students and our families, then that means that we can and we will have a diverse workforce. But we need to start by seeing the talent that already exists in the future pipeline that we have access to.
I could 100% agree. I'd also like to share some information about Mass Insight's AP Teachers of Color Advisory Council, which sort of was going through my mind when you were talking about the work you're doing with teachers. It was formed earlier this year. The APTOC Council is advising MI's AP team on issues affecting the advancement and professional development for teachers of color and issues affecting the success of students of color. Over the past few months, the APTOC has helped Mass Insight develop a mini grant program to support efforts by school districts to recruit and retain AP teachers of color, with grants awarded last month in Haverhill, Springfield, and Worcester. So I'm excited to hear that something like this exists, and hopefully we can grow more awareness for that, for the APTOC. And also, hopefully we can support the Educator Diversity Act.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love the work that's being done with our AP teachers, because here's the thing: if we have more educators of color in all classrooms, but in advanced work classrooms, that's also going to mean that we have more students of color who have access to that quality of education. And so there's a direct link there. And to me, it's just exciting to know that you all are continuing to work on this, and then also supporting other efforts in general to diversify the educator workforce.
Yes, I think it's definitely a team effort, and it is going to take a lot of coming together, working together to see the changes that we want to see. And so it's like a personal thing for me, because, being a Latina in Boston, coming to the city without any friends, contacts, nothing, and, paying for college and all of the struggles that I think back to, it's just exciting to be a part of something that could really have an impact in the life of my son, your kids' life in the future. So thank you for all the hard work you're doing. I'd like to see if we could just switch to Spanish for a second, and that language sometimes is that barrier that keeps us from understanding and learning, about what's out there or what we could support. Entonces, Lorena, muchas gracias por haber hablado conmigo. Pienso que hay muchas oportunidades para que la comunidad latina apoye iniciativas como el Diversity Act que estábamos hablando y quisiera que dieras un resumen de Latinos for Education y también el Diversity Act para que las personas que estén oyendo puedan apoyar y también tener más información.
Bueno, muchas gracias por la oportunidad. Latinos for Education es una organización sin fines de lucro al nivel nacional. Tenemos una oficina aquí en Nueva Inglaterra, basada aquí en Boston, Massachusetts, y hacemos el trabajo de desarrollar, conectar y identificar, desarrollar y conectar a latinos en el sector educativo, porque sabemos que cuando tenemos más representación en todas las ramas, pero específicamente en la rama de educación, vamos a poder tener mejores resultados con el acceso a lo académico para nuestros jóvenes y para nuestras familias. Entonces tenemos diferentes programas que ayudan el desarrollo de liderazgo para los educadores y para los líderes latinos, para que sepan qué es lo que está pasando realmente en la educación para la comunidad latina, y cuáles son las barreras y las soluciones que podemos implementar para mejorar, para que nuestros jóvenes tengan mejor rendimiento. Estamos en este momento trabajando en educar a las personas sobre una política que tiene que ver con la diversificación de maestros, porque los datos existen que nos dicen que nuestros jóvenes tienen mejor rendimiento académico cuando tienen profesores, cuando tienen líderes en sus comunidades escolares que son latinos o que son personas de color. Que entiendan su idioma, que aprecien su cultura, que puedan decir sus nombres, que puedan comunicarse con las familias, que entiendan cuáles son de pronto algunos de los obstáculos que nuestra comunidad se encuentre fuera de la escuela. Entonces sabemos que nuestros jóvenes tienen mejor rendimiento y es importante buscar la manera de diversificar en la rama de educación para que nuestros jóvenes tengan mejores oportunidades. Entonces, esta política elimina algunas de las barreras y también ayuda a que el Estado tenga más información o que provee más información al público sobre cuáles son los distritos que de pronto lo están haciendo bien a través del estado de Massachusetts, o donde hay distritos donde de pronto se ven más obstáculos para que los profesores se mantengan en los salones o en las aulas de nuestros jóvenes. Y también, bueno, tiene 4 diferentes puntos, y lo que les digo a las familias, aunque de pronto nos estén escuchando, es que primero que todo, ustedes son el mejor abogado para sus jóvenes. Entonces, de maneras que pueden ayudar a que tengamos más latinos en nuestras aulas, tengamos más latinos en posiciones de liderazgo, es preguntar. ¿Cuáles son los números? ¿Cuántos latinos hay en mi colegio? ¿Cuáles son las personas que pueden hablar en español en mi colegio? Y no solamente dejarlo en las escuelas, sino que también ir a los comités de sus distritos y hablar con la superintendiente, hablar con las personas que son parte del comité escolar, decirles que esto es algo que les importa, que quieren poder comunicarse con sus profesores directamente, que ellos no solamente le den a una persona que le traduzca la información, pero que también tengan esa representación dentro de sus escuelas. Y lo mismo se hace no solamente al nivel de la escuela, ni solamente al nivel del distrito, sino que también se hace al nivel estatal. Entonces se hace esa misma abogacía al nivel estatal con nuestros representantes, para que ellos sepan que este es un tema que nos importa y que es un tema que sabemos que va a tener mejores resultados para nuestros jóvenes y para nuestras familias si tenemos más representación latina en nuestras comunidades.
Gracias, Lorena. Para finalizar, voy a explicar un poquito que la misión de Mass Insight. Nosotros nos asociamos con estados, distritos, escuelas y comunidades para desarrollar estrategias personalizadas y desarrollar la capacidad para promover la equidad y las oportunidades en la educación y también como también especialmente en que todos los estudiantes tengan acceso a la educación que tanto necesitan, que tanto se merecen. Entonces, eso es más o menos lo que hace Mass Insight y también para los estudiantes que quieren tomar cursos de AP, que es para poder avanzar su carrera y poder ir a una universidad y perseguir sus logros. Entonces, trabajamos mucho con estudiantes desde el principio hasta que se gradúan ya del bachiller. Y pues yo como miembro de la junta directiva, es un placer trabajar con esta organización y espero que hayan aprendido algo de en lo que trabajamos y puedan actuar y hacer algo para su comunidad o al menos informarse de todo lo que está pasando en Boston y también en el país sobre educación. Thank you so much, Lorena. I hope we didn't go over too much, but this was great talking to you and learning more about your work in the community, what Latinos for Education is doing. And I hope we can continue to partner to really do great things for kids in Massachusetts and beyond.
Yes, thank you for the opportunity. The only way that we can move things forward is by working together. So really appreciate the partnership. Muchas gracias por la oportunidad. Y la única manera que vamos a poder seguir las cosas adelante, cambiar las cosas por lo mejor, es trabajar juntos. Entonces, gracias por seguir trabajando con nosotros.
Gracias, Lorena. Un buen día.
Lo mismo.
Thanks to everyone for joining. I hope you enjoyed this webinar, and I hope that you'll take some of the information we've shared and share it with your friends, colleagues, teachers, and anyone who is interested in education. Thank you. Take care. Bye.
Take care.